1980s General Motors cars catch a lot of heat. They are poorly built, humiliating to look at, and terribly slow. The 80s is like a culmination of all the things General Motors is known for being terrible at, all rolled up into one brittle plastic ball. Having said all that, right next to me I have the granddaddy of all 1980s General Motors products. This is a C4 Corvette, and despite being produced at the same time as the Citation and the Chevette, this, folks, is my all-time dream car. That's right. This is the car that I picture myself driving down a lonely desert road at sunset with the windows down and the sounds of a brawny American V8 crackling through the dry desert air. And despite not having purchased a dream C4 Corvette of my own yet, I've been lucky enough to be loaned this 1989 example from a friend to reenact a small part of my imagination for your entertainment. Let's take a look. I have long appreciated the C4 Corvette for its forward-thinking design and handling characteristics, and an overall character that simply cannot be found on newer models. And while I may be biased towards the C4 Corvette, I figured it's time for me to show you all around this one and see if you haven't yet been convinced of the C4 Corvette's virtues, if I might be able to change your mind slightly. Let's take a look. First, let's start off on the styling of the C4 Corvette, which may not be for everyone. Now, I'm willing to admit that chiseled, boxy styling may not be the dictionary definition of elegance. I think it represents a cool inflection point in the automotive industry, a time when brands were experimenting, moving away from the swoopy designs of yesteryear and thinking of a more modern look. It's fun to look back on today and appreciate this design, as it's different from basically any modern car on the road today, and it's simply beautiful in my eyes. Next up, let's take a look under the hood of the C4 Corvette, where the first thing you'll notice is the F1 inspired nature of the way that this hood opens. It has these exposed wheel wells which mimic kind of a go-kart type feel. And under the hood here we have an L98 V8 engine, which makes only 240 horsepower, but over 100 more pound-feet of torque, 345 to be exact, which is extremely impressive, especially given the time period for a car of this size, and explains why it's so fun to drive around town. And although this one is from 1989, the first year that it was offered with a 6-speed manual instead of the Doug Nash 3+3 transmission, this one is fitted with the 700R4 automatic transmission, and while that's a bit of a disappointment from a performance perspective, it actually drives much better than you might expect and kind of adds to the overall character of an American V8 sports car experience. Under the hood we also have the opportunity to take in the magnitude of the design of this engine. We can see that it's mounted behind the front axle, giving it a sort of mid-engine type driving feel, and we also have just the overall design that went into the styling of the engine bay. We have this absolutely massive intake manifold mounted onto the V8 engine, complemented by the Corvette logo on the valve covers. Overall, this is just a stunning engine bay to look at, and it looks like a lot of racing design influence went into it, and it must have been a really cool sight to see when these cars first came out. Under here, you'll also see the pop-up headlights in their resting position. They're in hibernation now. This is the first car I've ever driven with pop-up headlights, and I'll show you a little bit more of that later, but it's kind of cool to see when the hood is up. Now, to drop the hood, all you have to do is disengage this little piston here, and it will drop down. Do this slowly, and then you can just kind of drop it, and when you close the hood, it just gives this really solid thunk that shows how well built these C4 Corvettes are. Next up here on the interior, we're given access to the most period reflective part of this car, and I have to say the red vinyl against the exterior white screams 80s success story. And upon closer look, you'll see some of the electronic instrumentation here in the center gauge cluster, and also here on the console. These gauges were certainly ahead of their time when they came out, and today they frankly provide a fun and useful form of antiquated tech inside the interior of the car. And once you actually get inside the vehicle, you notice that these seats are actually more tightly bolstered than you might expect. This may point towards the difference in American waistlines in the 80s compared to today. While this interior is quite snug, even for someone who's 5'10", once you're actually inside the interior, it's not hard to find a comfortable driving position. Another thing that's worth looking at here on the interior relates to the structural rigidity of the car and how ahead of its time that was. Now you see, most cars at this time didn't really focus all that much on stiffness when it came to track performance, but when you look at this interior, the first thing you'll notice are these massive sills. When you climb inside the car, it's actually a little bit difficult to climb over these and get yourself into this cocoon that is the C4 interior. You'll also notice this massive center console. Both of these items contribute to the stiffness and track prowess of the C4 that many people may not know is so competitive. As far as drivability goes, the steering wheel is nice and small, and the shifter is in easy access of the hand. Both the pedals are in great position, and the sills and the center console don't really get in your way all that much. Now, that's a little bit different on the passenger side, where they intrude on the passenger compartment quite significantly, but still not much of an issue. It's just got rather small footwells on that side. Another thing that's worth mentioning about this car, in anticipation of the driving portion of this video, is that this one is featured with the Z51 package, and basically one of the main features of this package is the steering. Now, this is 1.5 turns lock to lock, and compared to the other C4 Corvettes of this time period, that's an extremely tight steering ratio, and it's pretty uncommon to see on cars of this era. So now I've shown you around the C4 Corvette and hopefully convinced you that this isn't your typical 80s General Motors product. But talking about a performance car only goes so far. Now it's time to actually head out onto the open road and find out if this C4 Corvette lives up to all the hype. Alright, so we are here behind the wheel of the glorious C4 Corvette. Now, based on some of my other videos, some of you may not know that this is actually my all-time dream car. I became obsessed with them within the past few years and had my eye on like a 96 collector's edition with the 6-speed manual. The owner of this one is trying to steer me more towards the older ones, and the reason for that is just based on the character and some of the more fun driving dynamics of the old ones. The new ones, the newer models, are definitely more powerful, but the older ones simply have that character that you can't replicate. But anyway, I'm absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to get behind this one and to realize, even with the automatic transmission, I mean, these cars drive so much better than I had ever imagined that they would. The handling is on par with some of the best modern sports cars that I've driven, especially since this one has the Z51 package like I spoke about earlier in the video. It's simply just a riot to drive, and you can kind of learn how to use the automatic transmission to make an overall fun experience. As you're going to see, you can kind of shift it, and this transmission has been rebuilt from original, so it has a bit different gearing that gives it a more sporty feel than you might find on a stock C4 transmission. But 700R4, great transmission, reliable, and it's actually more fun to drive than I thought. It's like kind of the overall American sports car driving experience. Not many Americans are fans of manual transmissions, especially Corvette buyers. So this is kind of era appropriate and definitely fun to drive. But the number one thing that I was most surprised about with the C4 Corvette is just the comfort of the car. It's a little bit difficult to get into because of these sills on the side here, and the seats are fairly heavily bolstered. But once you're inside the vehicle, it's actually super comfortable to drive and can definitely be used as a daily driver. Now, on some of the rougher roads here in Tucson, The car does exhibit some of that characteristic General Motors plastic rattling, but if you can get past that, this is a totally daily drivable car. And I mean, the handling is just phenomenal. When you're on a smooth road, you don't get any of that rattling. It just feels like a very well engineered, well put together car. Another thing that's really surprising about the car is, given all the sort of talk about how the L98 is not that powerful, it only makes 240 horsepower, the torque in this car is definitely underappreciated, because around town, when you give it the beans, it sounds so good and it fucking moves. I mean, this is just a phenomenally fast car to drive. And once we take this left turn here, we'll get onto a bit of a more curvy road and exhibit some of its driving characteristics. So, one thing the owner taught me about driving this car is to get it into second. It will start in first, shift through second automatically, and then you will shift into third to kind of get it to behave in a little bit of more of a sporty manner. And you'll see here on these roads, it just handles them flawlessly. The owner tracks this car regularly, so he's definitely pushed it to the limits, and the handling is, I mean, just when you think of an 80s General Motors product, you don't expect it to handle like this. And I know it's a Corvette, but American cars have just never been known for their handling. They're more known for their power and comfort, but this thing gives handling, especially from the 80s time period, a new meaning. It's well balanced. It's got kind of that mid-engine configuration with the engine behind the front axles, and it has no problem going through the corners at all. And just that sound of the V8 is intoxicating. There's no replacement for displacement, and that's especially true when you're talking about American cars. You gotta have the V8, and you want to hear that baby sing. I'm going to take a left over here, and then we'll kind of get to a stop and test out that acceleration. See how that goes. I'm not going to do anything crazy here. We are still in America. If we were in Mexico, you know, no speed limits down there, but I'm going to behave myself. But we're just going to drop it into second here. We're going to see that beautiful electronic dashboard that was so ahead of its time and is still quite useful today. Obviously, we've got the voltage up there. You can change this all around to your desire. We got a car back, so. Woo! Oh, we got javelinas up there. So that was 60. I don't know if I was fully flooring it. But I mean, this is life in Tucson here. 0 to 60 tests, and you gotta slow down for the javelinas. Doesn't get better than this, and look at this view. So this is what me and the owner were talking about. I mean, this is the American dream. Driving down a lonely desert road, beautiful view of Mount Lemmon, the sound of a V8. It does not get more iconic, and just, it just makes my heart tingle to be driving this thing in this location. This is pure Americana.